All right, welcome everyone. This is ACE's first recorded fireside chat. We're really excited to bring you all information today about the MBA process. As many of you are in the early stages of your career, I'm sure that business school has been on your mind and kind of wondering, I'm juggling a very busy job. When is the right time for me and how to really approach the application process? And today we have Sarah Sullivan, a recent graduate of the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And so we plan today to really talk about her application process, her decision process for why she wanted to go to business school, the GSB, and what her experiences were applying and then being in business school. So I'll pass it off to Sarah for her to kind of give a brief intro of herself, and then we can jump into the questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Jillian. Super excited to tell you guys more about my business school experience, a little bit about my background. I grew up in the Bay Area and then went to Columbia for undergrad. After undergrad, I did investment banking at Bank of America in their tech investment banking group at Palo Alto. I was promoted to associate, so I did a third year there and then ended up in venture capital at Adams Street Partners, where I was focused a lot on software and fintech. I did that for 2 years and then decided that was the right time for me to go to business school. So I'm happy to dive in wherever you want to start, Jillian.
Great. I'll start with decided this is the right time. And so I think being on that professional track, there's a pretty natural pause and, do I want to stay in my current seat and fight for a third year, or do I want to pivot to a different firm doing something similar, or do I want to go to business school? I guess the timing makes sense, but why did you kind of decide business school versus seeking some more professional experience?
Yeah, and this was definitely something I thought a lot about. I think for me, it was both personal and professional on the timing. I think on the professional side, my role at Adam Street was definitely a pre-MBA role, so it was kind of a 2 to 3 years. Since I spent 3 years in investment banking, and like a lot of people only do two, I kind of felt like the right time for me at Adam Street was probably after 2 years instead of three, since that would have been, if I waited three, that would be 6 years out of school, which is totally fine. I felt like I was about kind of the average age at business school. So like another year here or there would have actually been totally fine. But I kind of had it in my head that I was on the later side. Um, I also kind of had been talking to a lot of my bosses at Adam Street, and a lot of them have been to business school and specifically GSB, and they all thought it was one of the best just experiences that they had ever had professionally and personally. Professionally, they said that basically, if you want to stay in VC, their view was that if you want to be a partner one day, you've got to go to business school. I think that's a bit
Mm,
controversial. Many people have
interesting.
other takes on that.
Hmm.
Um, but I kind of felt like, I maybe needed something between like a more junior role and a more senior role in venture capital.
Hmm.
And I thought my other option professionally was maybe to go to a tech company. And I just didn't feel like that was what I wanted to do right then. So I felt like business school would be a great time for me to kind of explore, do I actually want to be a VC partner one day? Or like, is there another path for me? And something I'd also thought a lot about at Adam Street was I'd kind of built a bit of a track record doing more consumer focused deals in both investment banking and at Adam Street. But both the places I was at weren't focused at consumer at all. So that was one of my personal goals
Hmm.
for business school, is to transition into a more consumer focused role.
Interesting, interesting.
So that was kind of how I thought about it on the more professional side. Personally, and I think it is really important to consider the personal factor. So my husband was also considering business school and he was really sure he wanted to go.
Mm.
And he was going to apply that year. And I kind of felt like for our relationship, us going at the same time would really be like the best case scenario. So I was like, oh, I'm not 100% sure. But since he's applying, like, I think this is the best time for me. And if I get in. Like, I don't have to go. I can decide then, but I'm going to apply now since he's applying now.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, just kind of going back to the part about, doing your third year in banking and then, your 2-year program at Adam Street, I'm in a similar boat where I did a third year in banking as well. And something that actually kind of surprised me is that I kind of just assumed going into my role at Carlisle that this is definitely a 2-year program and that's it. And like, that's kind of going into the role. That's kind of how I was like, okay, business school, 2 years, that's how I should be thinking about it. But I was surprised how many people stayed for that third year. And so, I kind of wish I kind of took some time starting my role to kind of position myself to really consider, do I really want to stay for that third year or 2 years and I'm out? And so just something for people to keep in mind about kind of, I know people think private equity is strictly a 2-year program, but it's not always the case. So kind of moving on to, you really talked about wanting to get more of that consumer exposure that you weren't really getting in your previous role. And now thinking about business school, kind of how did you weave that into your like why MBA story and kind of why you're applying to business school?
Yeah. Are you talking specifically about like the application, like what I wrote
Yes.
about?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm.
Um, I have to admit, I don't think I really wrote about that. Um,
Interesting.
sorry, I have a little bit of a cough. Um, I think I had it kind of in the back of my mind, but that's also something I've thought about more at business school, doing a lot of reflecting,
Mm,
thinking about what I want next. But I think I kind of knew it at when I was applying, but I didn't necessarily feel like it was as much a part of my personal story in terms
mm,
of especially for Stanford when they ask you, what matters most to you and why.
yeah.
Um, that actually didn't really make it into that essay at all.
Interesting.
It was more about like how I felt as like a woman in the workplace and how like I really want to lift up other women in the workplace and how I can do that, how Stanford might help me to do that. And that's like a lot more important to me than consumer stuff, even though like when it comes to like what industry I want to work on, definitely consumer over things like software. But I just tried to be really more authentic about like core values in terms of my essay.
And that's I really want to dig deeper into that because I think the essay writing process is something that's pretty daunting, and especially for a question about like tell me about yourself or what's most important about, like to you. And it's just like that's a pretty big question to ask anyone. How did you kind of go about like just like trying to approach that and kind of like brainstorming like how do I put something like that onto paper? Like did it take you like 5 minutes or was that like a really long process for you to kind of think about?
It was a really tough question. I think I got kind of lucky because I actually was kind of just chatting with my boss at Adam Street. He was just like kind of throwing out some not he I mean he knows me well, but I don't know if he knows me like that well. And he was just throwing out some ideas and he just said this one thing and I was like, I think I can make an essay out of this. Like this really resonates with me. And
Mm,
so that actually really helped me um think it through. And so like what I did, I have to admit, I probably started the essays like August 1st for the like whatever September or something deadline. And I think that's okay because I don't think you want to like totally agonize over the essays forever. Um, on the other hand, I only applied to 2 schools, so you can keep that in mind in terms of my essay timeline.
yeah.
Um, for me, like I'm a person who just needs to work on it for like a few days straight. So I actually like took I don't know, like a couple days off from work and made it into like a 4-day weekend or something and was like, I'm gonna just like really crank on this for
Mm,
4 days. And yeah, I just kind of took that thing my boss said and made it thought about my values, my family values, like how I kind of came to be and really focused on personal development.
mhm.
Um, my friend had asked me to read her essay, which was very kind of similar in focus and stuff. And the one thing that I pulled out that I thought she was missing was kind of like, how did you come to be the person you are today? Um, And I think that's what they really want to see.
Yeah, and that's really important. And I guess like taking a step back, obviously you went to the GSB, but kind of could you walk through kind of that month of August, kind of getting your applications together from more of like a logistical standpoint? Like you said, you took off 2 days from work, but did you find that it was like a process that was pretty well integrated with balancing with your kind of your professional responsibilities, or was it I'm finding as much time as I can outside of work, and trying to squeeze it in where I can.
I guess my scenario is a little unique because I'll kind of give you my timeline. So I thought about applying to business school for that cycle in about January for September. Um, in January, I like tried studying for the GMAT by myself, went terribly. Signed
Mhm.
up for a class, it honestly still went terribly. In about May, I quit. I said, I'm not going to business school. I don't like this. This is too hard. I hate the GMAT. I don't want to do it. I had a conversation in July with my boss. Um, and he was just like, this is kind of the conversation where he really told me how great his experience was at GSB.
Mhm.
And he was also like, it's COVID. What are you doing? Like, just apply. Like, I was like, oh, it's kind of hard. I don't really like studying for the GMAT. Um, but he was right. I was like, okay, I don't have anything better to do. Now it's a little different. There's better things to do. But so on that point, like he was really, really supportive of my application. So he totally understood that I was going to take a few days off. And like he was also understanding that I was kind of juggling the two things. And he was really willing to help me in terms of the essay and the recommendations and everything like that. So obviously having a supportive workplace goes a long way. In terms of like the actual kind of once that was probably somewhere mid-July, August, I'm like, all right, it's time to get going again. Um, yeah, I think I was just like, I need a big chunk of time to focus on the two essays, the Wharton and Stanford. And then I was also studying for the GMAT, basically all of through August. Took it probably 3 weeks into August, was like, I think I can do better. Got the absolute last possible date, like, I don't know, in the first week of September, took it again. Um, and that was kind of that.
And that's all she wrote. Wow. That sounds, I mean,
Accelerated.
yeah, exactly. Accelerated is quite a word there. Yeah, and I think having a supportive workplace definitely goes a long way. I mean, I think being in VC, private equity, and people kind of aware of this timeline, I think generally consensus is that at least in these two fields, it is at least if not supported, it very much acknowledged that in 2 years you're probably going to be considering this or a different external opportunity. So, we are fortunate in that sense that it's not very much a surprise when we let our bosses know. So yeah, but I guess now, like, we've gone through the application process. I have like one quick question on, you've submitted your application and then you have like interviews. And we don't have to get into too much detail, but just kind of curious, did you feel pretty prepared for that? Or was it similar? I think the GMAT is an extreme kind of preparation case, but did you feel like you were preparing, pretty heavily for the interview? Or was it kind of, I've done my research over time and I know the school pretty well, let me brush up on the information, but I feel pretty good about this.
Okay, I just thought of one point earlier on your question about the essays and how I like prepared for that process.
Hmm.
One thing, so I'll just add that first before we talk about the interviews.
Hmm.
One thing I would recommend is if you can just have your either like significant other or like best friend help you brainstorm what some of your like best qualities are, it's
Mm,
really, really helpful. Like why they like hanging out with you, why they see so much value in you. Like sometimes you're just not going to think of those things. But they can just see you so much more objectively and like pull out those qualities. So that's something I found really helpful. And I also like did with my husband who was also applying. Um, and I think that can just like get to the your more authentic core really, really.
yeah.
Okay, so interviews. Um, I feel really prepared for the Stanford one and underprepared for the Wharton one. For Stanford, um, I just tried. I just tried to Google as much as possible on like what are the Stanford interview questions. And like there was kind of a list online, like whatever, compiled between different sources. And like I kind of just like wrote up an answer for almost all of the questions. And a lot of them are about just like telling specific stories about things you've encountered in work or your personal life, like challenges and initiatives and things like that. So just having kind of like a story bank almost um, was super helpful. And at least in my Stanford interview, I felt like my interviewer kind of just went through those questions. So there was no surprises. Um, I've heard it's really you can kind of get anything. Some of the people really, really follow the script, and some people are more just like looking to get to know you on more of like a chatting basis for Stanford. But I felt like at least kind of anything I read online really prepared me for the Stanford interview.
Mm-hmm.
For Wharton, that is the whole other story. It's like the team-based thing.
I've heard about
Um,
this.
I did not personally hire a consultant. I feel like that could have been an area where either talking to more people who had done it or hiring a consultant just for like a few like team-based interview practices could have really helped me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I ended up getting into Stanford before I found out about Wharton, so I withdrew my application, so I do not know what would have happened, but I did feel like the interview I felt like everyone else was a little more prepared for the team-based aspect than I was. So I think, yeah, maybe just talking to more people. I probably could have talked to more people who had done it before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just such a different application or interview
Yeah.
setting, and you're working with different personalities, which I could see why they would want to test that, but it is a pretty different one to prepare for, so definitely understand where you're coming from, and definitely understand the hesitation with like hiring a consultant or someone to kind of help you prepare for that too. So yeah, so I guess now I want to move into the GSB. I'm super excited to hear about your experiences. I guess like what were your intentions kind of going into the school? I know you touched on when you were there, you wanted to get more into consumer and whatnot. GSB is really known for a lot of innovation. Did you find that there was like you were getting that too? Kind of I guess just high level, kind of how did you enjoy your experience? And then I can kind of get into some more details from there.
Yeah, I think high level, um, it's hard to remember exactly what I was trying to get out of it, but I can definitely say what I did get out of it.
Yeah.
And I think this is one and the same. But for me, I was just kind of wanting to like fine tune and actually practice some leadership skills.
Mhm.
At least for me, like, you're an analyst, you're maybe leading an intern if you're lucky. Um, you're really good at being the bottom of the totem pole. You're good at like putting your head down and doing like really detailed, like quality work. So you're good at your job, but that leadership aspect, at least for me, like I was not practicing day to day. So I just felt like there's a little bit of a gap there. And that's something that Stanford really focuses on. I think for me, especially, Stanford is kind of silly, but like Stanford really hypes you up in terms of like you're at Stanford, everything is great. Like that just like thinking about all that you've accomplished and like they just tell you every day, like you are a leader. Like you're going to be a great leader and this is how you're gonna do it. Like honestly, I kind of needed this. Like I didn't always like see myself as a leader. And then just getting that like those kind of soft skills, I would say, to give you that confidence to back up that hype. So like, we have classes where you just practice negotiating. I'd never negotiate. Literally, they were that the final project was like, talk about a time you negotiated something. I had a really hard time thinking of a time prior to Stanford that I negotiated, like almost never. But this class was so helpful because it was really uncomfortable at first. But like I'm about to negotiate a job offer like probably tomorrow, and like I actually feel pretty prepared. It's not gonna be fun, but I feel prepared.
Mhm. That's what's important.
um, yeah, so I think just on those like soft leadership skills, that's something I really wanted out of Stanford, and I can tell you like it delivered. Um, I also, for me personally, like with COVID, I was feeling a little uninspired work-wise, just wasn't sure what I wanted. And I knew going to Stanford, like, just the student body you're surrounded with is incredible. People are working on super cool things. Um, like I would have never imagined. One of my classmates is like a Lebanese opera singer. Someone else is like has worked at like a Michelin star restaurant. Other people are obviously doing super cool things in tech, and just like a little bit of inspiration has me really excited for the next step.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So those are the things I've been most excited about from Stanford.
Yeah, and I feel like in the things that I've heard from other students that have gone there, I feel like a lot of the classes are very like definitely focused on the soft skills, but almost like emotional in a sense where it's just that, there's certain classes where you're role playing and like really like, really connecting with yourself as a leader, yourself in like tough situations. Could you like kind of speak to kind of the curriculum and like the classes that you took there? Like obviously you have like the core classes, which can be pretty analytical and like boring for lack of a better word, or hopefully I'm wrong with that. And then you have the elective classes both at the GSB, and I'm sure you could probably take classes outside of the GSB as well. Kind of what was your academic experience like?
Yeah, so you're not wrong. The first like quarter, basically 2 quarters is more of the core. So that's where just like everyone kind of gets up to speed on. There's like some data science classes, some accounting, finance. There's like an ethics class, and a few others where just you kind of establish that common ground. If you're already in finance, like there's some advanced classes. Nothing too crazy, but everyone kind of gets on the same page. They're not the most thrilling, but like I still learned some stuff about finance, and I've been in finance for a while. So very useful. Then when you get into the spring quarter of your second year and or of your first year and then your second year, it's basically all electives. Um, and yeah, Jillian is totally right. There are a lot of the favorite electives are role playing classes. So it's I think the reading material is often similar to Harvard. I don't know how the class is. My guess is a little different, but maybe similar. You usually have like a case, and then the professor will kind of role play, um, sometimes cold call you, and just play out that really tough situation. Maybe you have to fire someone. Um, you know, Maybe something else has gone wrong with the company. Maybe you have to make a change. Just thinking through those scenarios, and maybe you do a good role play, maybe you don't, but it's actually so helpful to hear from your classmates like how they would have approached the situation. So those were some of the best classes I took. I think the best class that's an example of that is the um it's called MGE, and that's managing growing enterprises. And it's
Mm.
basically all role plays for a full quarter. Um, that was just one of the most practical and use like the class I'll take the most from for sure.
Interesting. And I think like you really hit on like a good point there for people who are trying to determine like what school is best for them is really thinking about their learning styles. And like for me, I'm very much I need to play this out like in actuality to really understand how certain things work as opposed to being told or kind of talking through things. And so it's like, okay, well, I'm hearing there's a lot of role playing classes and whatnot. And so I'm like that I feel like is much more tailored to my learning style rather than a class that might be more reading and discussion only based. And so I think that's like a pretty big nuance that you hit there that definitely is pretty helpful. I guess like outside of the class, what did you really what were you involved with in like the Stanford community?
Yeah, so the number one thing I was involved with was the WIM group. So that's Women in Management at Stanford. Um, my first year, I kind of worked on their big like end of year event. And then since I worked on that, I joined the board for my second year, and was like the marketing chair. The clubs, there's like a couple different categories of clubs. There's pure fun, so that's like sports, or there's a wine club, which is I actually learned a shocking amount at the wine club. Didn't know anything about wine before. Now I know how to order some wine. Anyway, great time. There's career oriented ones, and so I was a part of like the VC club and the consumer and retail club, which just basically brings speakers to kind of like lunchtime talks. Sometimes they'll do treks, like that'll be like a trip. Like a consumer and retail did a luxury retail trek to Europe over spring break. Sorry. So those are kind of the career clubs, and then there's obviously the identity clubs. I think the identity clubs are probably, and WIM would fall under that. People invest probably the most time in the identity clubs at Stanford, and even the career clubs, they're not make or break in terms of your career. You don't have to be on the leadership. I think those things can help you make more connections with the industry, especially if you're not already in the industry you want to go into. But it's not a requirement to invest a ton of time in the industry clubs. Yeah, and then I think I also spent just a lot of time prioritizing like making friends who enjoyed doing the same things as me. So I played a lot of beach volleyball. I did a lot of hiking. And I tried to make a lot of friends who are also super interested in consumer and retail.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the wine club sounds particularly fun for sure. And I guess like I'm kind of curious because there's a lot you can get into at Stanford. Like you obviously have your classes and you have the various different organizations that you can get involved with as well. How did you manage your time as a student? I know like I'm the common theme is that you're getting pulled in a bunch of different directions and you have to really learn how to prioritize your time and kind of love to hear how you kind of like did that for yourself while at Stanford.
Yeah, I'm trying to think that's definitely true. I hear a lot of people talk about how business school is like insane on like schedules and stuff. I tried to really stay true to my priorities, and like I got a lot of sleep. Like this is like you don't have to stay up late working if you don't want to. Like you're always you always have the choice and like full control of your life. So I tried to remember that and was like, and that means I'm going to get 8 hours of sleep like every night pretty much, which I really stuck to. And like spend time on my like my relationship with my significant other and like friends. Aside from that, something that was really helpful for me was kind of putting boundaries on when I was going to look for a job and when I was not going to look for a job. And so for me, like the first quarter of business school, I was like, I'm not going to do any job stuff whatsoever. It's just like not the time. I want to meet people. I would just focus on like meeting my classmates, getting integrated, finding out like how exactly I want to spend my time at Stanford, and just like put the job stuff on. That obviously doesn't work for everybody because there's certain industries that will just like have to recruit them.
Yeah.
But I think that's okay. If you have to recruit then like you don't have to do that the next quarter. So if you're someone who's in an industry that's a little more flexible, I would just I would kind of decide when the right time is and kind of restrain yourself to looking for a job or internship to that time if you can. I think the number one thing is just people just say yes to things and then like overload themselves. I tried really hard not to do that. And I think, the first year I definitely did that a little bit. And I was like, I think I've been going to like too many like 200-person parties. And I don't actually like that. That's not that fun for me. Like sometimes it's fun, but do I need like that's not when I'm the most happy. Like when I'm the most happy is like in this scenario doing this. And so I was like, okay, for my second year, I'm gonna like cut out the stuff where I tend to say yes to, but I realize it's not that fun for me, and just do more of the stuff that like really makes me happy. That's also accomplishing the goals of like meeting my classmates, getting more interested in consumer and retail and things like that.
Yeah, that's actually a really helpful point. I have to say a lot of the answers I've gotten from that question do not involve like time blocking recruiting, which really makes a whole lot of sense, for sure. And before I get into the fun question about the trips, the business school trips, just like one more question about, I guess, going to school at Stanford and being in the Bay Area. I think naturally people are really attracted to kind of the entrepreneurship and the innovation that's happening in the space or in the region, and recognize that you kind of were focused more on consumer and retail, which still can really fall into that category. Just kind of curious, like what you observed or what you kind of took away from that type of the entrepreneurial kind of like innovation environment at Stanford, and really like how students are really able to tap into what's happening in the Bay Area and being so close to Sand Hill Road and things like that.
Yeah. I guess a couple points. I guess I loved the feeling at Stanford that everything was kind of like cutting edge, I guess. Like
Mhm.
anything that tech people are talking about or VCs are talking about, like everyone's talking about it at Stanford like super early on. And that is so fun. VCs are always on campus, like tech entrepreneurs are always on campus, like to the point that people are like, oh, like I guess we should invite people from other industries sometimes. Like it's really overloaded on that. I think like for me, that's what I was looking for. That's who I was interested in hearing from. The variety is good too. But so it's just kind of exciting. You just feel like you're like, oh, I feel like I have the pulse on things in terms of tech and VC. Um in terms of classes, like one of the like coolest classes I took was Startup Garage. You basically form a team and just try to start a company in a quarter or two. And I think the best part about that is there's a full range of who's in the class. You can just be like, I'm kind of interested in this one, like specific part of an industry, and I'm just going to see if there might be something there. Even if you have like no intention of actually starting a company after school, the other end is like my friend was in that class. He's currently working on the same idea that he was going to work on, and he's going to try to make a full startup and get funding. So that class is like truly for everyone. And it was just really cool to go through the process. Like these VCs and entrepreneurs lead you through like, okay, here's what industry you want. Here's like just interview a bunch of people. These are the questions you want to consider. Here's how to build a prototype. And like here's all the phases you need to think about. And the end of the class is like you get a pitch to a VC. And it's super helpful to hear what they're wondering about your industry or your idea. And I just found that so valuable, even though like currently I have no plans to start a company.
I've heard about Startup Garage and it sounds super fun. Like even in undergrad I did something similar. I had like a minor in engineering entrepreneurship, and the whole thesis was like building a business plan over the course of the semester. And it's so fun to kind of go through that experience of like starting, kind of like launching your own kind of venture. So definitely hear you there. And I bet with all the resources at Stanford that it's like even that much more real, and you really getting into the weed of things. All right, Sarah. So the last question that I'm sure everyone would love to hear about are the business school trips. I'm sure people see a bunch of those on Instagram and whatnot. But just kind of curious, like, are they as fun as they seem for the non-business school folks?
They're pretty fun. Um, I okay, I think this kind of goes back to prioritizing. Uh, my first year, I went on a lot of the really big trips. And those were really cool because they were to places I would not have even like imagined going, like Colombia. Um, I went to Mexico, I went to a few other places, and they're really big trips. I had a great time, but that was kind of part of my reflection over the summer of the second year. I was like, so I've been fun, but I don't think this is my like preferred travel style. And so one of like the highlights of my business school experience was hiking in Patagonia with like some of my closest friends. I think there was like 7 of us, and we spent 2 weeks over spring
Mhm.
break in Patagonia, and it was incredible. And it was just so meaningful to me to be able to spend so much time with like these great friends that I had made and like really deepen our connection and like hang out with their significant others as well. Um, in terms of like I definitely spent more on these trips than I anticipated for sure. I definitely do not regret that. I think it was worth like every cent. Um, and like as someone who is considering, maybe starting a family in a couple of years, like I was just so glad to be able to see so much more of the world than like I honestly could have ever imagined in such a short time.
Yeah, they seem really incredible. And like, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure some of them are like student run, like outside of like any type of academic kind of requirements. But aren't some of these trips also like part of like classes or like not or like some sort of kind of Stanford affiliated type of like kind of organization or are they completely like student run, has nothing to do with school? Could you kind of like give some more insight
Yeah.
to that?
So the trips I went on were purely student run, self-organized. Um, this is maybe a bit of like I'm a little bit bitter about this at Stanford actually. So one of the things you might see a lot in their marketing materials is that they have spring break trips that usually they're like, I don't know, 10 days or something. They are run by students, but also a professor goes along and there's usually a theme and you try to meet with a lot of business people or political um people in politics and stuff. And I was really hyped about that. Unfortunately, due to COVID, my class didn't really end up getting to go on those.
Mm,
Um, but I've actually heard I think those are like some of the best experiences that other people had in business school. So if you have that opportunity, I would highly recommend it at Stanford. I'm really sad that I missed out on that. And that was like I think part of that was some of the trips I went on my first year, there were maybe a few regrets that some of them were a little more focused on partying and a little less on like cultural aspects and like learning.
mm,
I could have done more of that. I think I did more of that my second year, through even the student run trips. But yeah, if you have an opportunity to go at Stanford on one of those spring break trips, I have heard just amazing things about
mm.
them.
Good to know. Good to know. Well, that is the end of my questions for tonight. Sarah, again, completely very much appreciate the time, giving your insight about the application process, kind of motivations for going, and then your Stanford experience, which sounds absolutely incredible. So, for the ACE community, we'll be having a series of these events, just getting deeper into the MBA experience and for women who are coming from a finance background and kind of just curious about how we should be thinking about these things and leaning on our job or the resources available to really get us to our next step. Definitely keep tuning in. But for now, again, thank you, Sarah, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks so much, Jillian.